employers, and policymakers so they sustain and scale will over time. Just a brief background on who we are so you can contextualize some of the messaging. In our very brief time with you today, we'll start by defining will from the Canadian perspective. Then we'll situate will within our context, including how it was developed nationally, how it operates in our context at the University of Waterloo, as one example of scale and practice. And then from there, we'll highlight some of the benefits of will, and finally take a step back and look at how you can build the core elements of a work integrated learning ecosystem. So very briefly, a crash course, if you will. At its core, we understand will as an educational model based on experiential learning that is intentionally embedded in a program or course with clear learning outcomes and academic oversight. It gives students direct, structured opportunities to learn through real or simulated workplace contexts. But importantly, and this is the key point, it really goes beyond the experience alone. It has to be integrated with study, meaning students actively connect what they learn in the classroom with what they do in practice. And equally important, and one of the things that separates will from other pedagogies, is that will involves active collaboration between students, institutions, and external partners, such as employers and community organizations, with shared responsibility for the learning experience. And finally, will is designed to develop employability, building not just technical skills, not just the skills that students would learn in the classroom setting, but things like adaptability, confidence, and professional judgment. So when we talk about will, we're not just talking about work experience, we're talking about intentionally designed curriculum-based experiences that integrate learning and meaningful work. This slide highlights that will can take several different forms depending on how the experience is structured. You're probably already familiar with some forms of work integrated learning. You might call them work-based learning, things like cooperative education and internships. I won't really go into much detail there, but there's a whole suite of them that we consider in the international context and here in Canada as being forms or types of work integrated learning. So, co-op really briefly, programs that are likely paid, typically structured in 4-month work terms that alternate between academic study. Sometimes this could take over 4 or 5 years of a student's time and education. Internships, similar, but sometimes longer, perhaps lasting a year. They can be paid or unpaid. These two forms of will have really been the staples or the backbones of most work integrated learning programs. You might also be familiar with forms of will such as practicums, shorter, typically unpaid, supervised by a licensed professional, often in fields like health or education. These are very common. But there's other forms of work integrated learning, such as community and industry research projects, or as we call them, CHIRPs, where students work on applied research or real world challenges with external partners. Across these models, duration and structure and purpose can vary. They can look very different, but they all share a commonality, which is that they're designed to connect academic learning with real world application. Over to Anne to talk a little bit more about work integrated learning at Waterloo.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Dave. And so we want to have a broad discussion about will in Canada today, but as you already heard from Tristan, the University of Waterloo's co-op model is the primary reason that people come to us at WorkLearn to understand how work integrated learning is developed at Waterloo and to get guidance and advice on building their program. So I thought we would take a couple of minutes. I'll give you a really brief overview of the model, some of its outcomes, and then we're really happy to take questions at the end. Next slide, please. So just to help situate you, the University of Waterloo is located in the province of Ontario, just north of the border, so about a 2.5-hour drive from Buffalo or 3.5 hours northeast of Detroit. Waterloo is sometimes referred to as the MIT of the North. We are consistently ranked in the top 150, sometimes top 100 universities, depends on the year. And in the top 50 for disciplines like computer science, math, electrical engineering, and technology. And the reason that this is important is there are a lot of very, very strong connections between the history of the University of Waterloo and its growth and establishment, the establishment of its reputation. So next slide, please. So if you will indulge me, I will take you back in time. The University of Waterloo did not start with a strong reputation. It was established in 1957 with a highly criticized partnership between education and industry. So, just to sort of help you understand the context, like many American states in our province in Ontario, we were experiencing a post war manufacturing boom. And very specifically in our region, we had an acute shortage of engineers. There were no universities that granted degrees to engineers. And more importantly, the industry within the region was reporting that the graduates that they were getting didn't have the skills that they needed. So the founders of the University of Waterloo thought they needed to establish an institution that could help build up engineers and that they would do so directly in partnership with industry. So they had heard about Herman Schneider's model. They adopted the American model of cooperative education with the idea that students would alternate between school and work throughout their degree. Back in 1957, there were 74 brave students, many of whom didn't even have their high school diplomas, that joined the first cohort at the University of Waterloo. The whole concept was seen as completely radical and highly criticized by peer institutions. They called it interrupted education. They said that the program would lead to the development of an inferior engineer and that industry wouldn't engage. Next slide, please. When we fast forward almost 7 years later, the University of Waterloo now runs the world's largest co op program. Every year, we send over 25,000 students from 120 different academic disciplines to complete paid work terms with over 8,000 employers around the world. So, at its core, those students alternate between 4 months of school and 4 months of work, such that by the time that they graduate, they have up to 2 years of paid work experience in up to 6 different organizations. Along the way, they build a very strong professional network, they have stellar resumes, and they create a remarkable ability to transfer their knowledge and their skills across very diverse contexts. The paid nature of the program also really helps to increase access to education. So on average, the students will earn between 6,500 and 6,500 and 25,000 US dollars for 4 months of work. And again, they're alternating between school and work. To give you a sense to sort of situate it, our most expensive tuition at Waterloo is 14,000 US dollars a year. So by participating in the co-op program, students can either completely or almost completely pay for their studies. But of course, it's not just access and experience, it really is those outcomes that matter. So those inferior graduates that our colleagues were worried about have one of the highest employment rates in the province. We have 96% of our graduates employed within 6 months in a job that is related to the skills they developed at Waterloo. They also see salary premiums that start from that first day of work and persist throughout their careers. And it's not just the students that see these kinds of economic outcomes. So, numbers of impact studies have been done over the years. We just had one done this year by EY. They have calculated that for every dollar that an employer spends on salaries, they earn $2.20 in economic gain. We have surveyed our employers to better understand their experience. 93% of them report a positive return on investment, stating that they got more or much more from participating in the program than they themselves put in. Next slide, please. And the last piece that I just wanted to highlight in a Waterloo overview, because I think it's important to those of us that are thinking about building up our economies and economic development, we see a very strong connection between participation in the co-op program and entrepreneurship. So Waterloo is the #1 university in Canada for creating unicorns, and a number of research studies have shown that direct connection between what the students experience and learn in their work terms and the ventures they later create. So what we think is happening here is that the students are going out into a workplace and they experience a problem. They come back to class, they go to a different workplace, and they see a similar problem. And rather than having students creating ventures for problems that might not exist, the students are thinking about how they can resolve those real world problems that they've been exposed to as a part of their co op program. To help support this, we've developed infrastructure on campus, incubators, accelerators. Students can do a co op term to build their own enterprise to help them launch those ventures. And again, just very quickly, one of the research studies that was done by some of our colleagues looked at 55 of our graduates that had VC funding and patents and found a direct technological proximity between the patents the students developed and the places they had worked on their co-op work terms. So that is a rapid fire overview. I'm going to pass it back to Dave to talk about some of the benefits of work integrated learning that we see from participating in the program.
Thanks, Ann. Yeah, it's a really good segue from some of the economic and entrepreneurial based benefits to a broad overview of some of the highlights from the research literature and practice about what people, students, employers, and institutions get out of their participation in work integrated learning. And I guess be forewarned, I'll try to really skim through this to make sure that there is time for questions at the end. What I'm doing really is summarizing a series of book chapters on this subject, so I don't imagine that we can really dive too deeply into it today. But if you do have questions, you've got our contact information. We'd be happy to share more. So really briefly, in a nutshell, some of the benefits for students regarding work integrated learning. Well, we know based on the research that WIL delivers a wide range of benefits for students. And in the interest of time, I just want to highlight three of those for you here. First, WIL strengthens discipline-related skills. Students gain hands-on experience in fields like engineering, healthcare, business, or the arts, helping them build technical competence and confidence. And at the same time, WIL develops professional skills such as communication, teamwork, problem solving, adaptability, which are critical for workplace success. In fact, some research suggests that these are the things that help open doors towards industry. Second, WIL also supports career self-management. Students develop clearer career goals, learn how to navigate professional environments, and become more proactive in managing their own pathways. So there's sort of like a sense of agency, really places students at the center of their own journey. And finally, all of this contributes to greater employability. Graduates with WIL experience are better prepared for the workforce, more competitive in hiring, and more likely to find roles aligned with their skills. And already mentioned some of that. There's a pretty robust evidence base supporting this claim at this point. Taken together, WIL doesn't just prepare students for work, it transforms how they learn, who they become, and how they transition into their careers. WIL also offers a range of tangible benefits for organizations. Again, very briefly, just want to highlight a few of these for you here. First, benefits start with increased organizational capacity. Students can take on meaningful work, projects, day-to-day operations, daily analyses, things that might otherwise be delayed or sort of pushed off the side of a professional's desk, bringing energy and momentum while freeing up experienced staff to focus on higher level priorities. Second, supervising students supports staff development, giving employees the chance to build leadership and coaching skills. I have a really personal direct experience with this. I learned a lot about people management earlier in my career because I got the opportunity to supervise co-op students. And I often think about where would I be today if not given that first opportunity to work with these more junior staff. A lot of the people who find their way into people management roles may find themselves starting with supervising a work integrated learning student. And finally, WIL strengthens connections with post-secondary institutions, opening the door for longer-term partnerships, things like research collaborations and ongoing access to emerging talent, or maybe even things like curriculum, co-design, and redevelopment. So there's definitely some benefits for employers to be involved in work integrated learning. Lastly, there's benefits for higher education institutions that offer opportunities for work integrated learning. WIL tends to strengthen an institution's reputation for employability because when graduates consistently leave with real experience and relevant skills, it signals to students and employers and policymakers that the institution actually produces talent ready to contribute in the local workforce. Second, it enhances the student experience because when students clearly see how studies connect to real-world applications, their engagement tends to go up. Learning feels more relevant, It supports persistence, satisfaction, and academic success. Third, will enables partnerships for innovation because working with employers and community organizations allows institutions to gain access to current industry challenges and opportunities. And this supports applied research, curriculum innovation, all the things that I mentioned earlier. Finally, and I think this aligns very well with your task force, will tends to deepen community engagement. It connects institutions to regional priorities via the students who are sent off campus into the community. Economic development, social challenges, workplace gaps. Through placements, projects, institutions actually become active contributors to what's going on around them. So taken together, this is kind of the key message. Will really helps institutions move beyond just delivering education to actually playing a central role in the talent development and innovation and community impact that happens in their local context. So again, that's years and years and years of research boiled down into a 2 to 3 minute script. I absolutely know that that's too much to handle in this single presentation. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out. We've got a treasure trove of resources that we could share. But what we really want to talk about is the opportunities to build a will ecosystem. So back to Anne to cover some of that.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. And maybe I'll have you just flip ahead to the next slide. So, as Dave mentioned, I've spent a number of years studying work integrated learning ecosystems and working in countries around the world to help build up WIL. And I truly believe, with as much Canadian humility as I can muster, that we have established one of, if not the strongest work integrated learning ecosystems in the world. And if you will indulge me in a very quick little history lesson, I would like to kind of go back a bit in time and highlight some of the key decisions that I think led to the development of that ecosystem, because I see a really similar opportunity for Louisiana in what you're attempting to do to build this up, considering all of the partners that help to make work integrated learning successful. So I won't spend too much time on this, but just bear with me. We're going to go back to the 1970s. The University of Waterloo has been operating for about 15 years, and there are about 15 other higher education institutions in Canada now offer the model of co-op. Throughout this time, these directors have stayed in touch with each other. They've learned from one another, and they've decided that they should establish a community of practice. So the National Association for Cooperative Education was created in 1973. It was called the Canadian Association for Cooperative Education. And it has been one of the most instrumental components in how we have advanced work integrated learning within our country. We've helped to build up capacity, but also to advocate to all of the relevant stakeholders, to government, to industry, and so on and so forth, by coming together and having a collective voice. And so I would really encourage you to think about how you build a community of practice in Louisiana as you start to build up this work. The second piece comes along just 6 years later, actually in direct response to some things that were happening in the United States. So if you are a history nerd like me, you may or may not know that in 1968, the College Work Study Program was established under the Higher Ed Act, and there was a whole flurry of activity in the United States to build co-op programs. And over time, through lobbying, the sort of requirements for what could be funded got degraded to the point that any program with any kind of employer engagement could be called a co-op program. And so the Canadian colleagues were watching what was happening very closely in the States. And they were also very much hoping to get federal funding. And so they said, well, if we're going to do this, we really think we've got something with this model, and we should probably set some standards so that if funding is made available, everyone has to kind of follow along these standards. So they went away for a weekend to Quebec and had some wine and some cheese, and they wrote up these accreditation standards. Dave and I, just 2 years ago, worked on a project to sort of revise them. But I will say that almost all of the core elements that were established in 1979 have held true today. And I'll just point out a couple of them and why I think they're really important. So the first one was that 30% of the degree needs to be spent in work, and that work period is 16 weeks or 4 months. This was critically important because it created interoperability. So employers could hire students from across the country with relatively similar timelines, relatively similar processes, and they could start to understand what this concept of co-op was. The second piece was the decision that students were going to be paid. Not all forms of will in Canada are paid, but co-op is. And coming to agreement on this means that we as higher education institutions are not competing with each other. We don't have one school that offers engineering students for free and another school that says, wait a minute, you have to pay them. This has made the concept of paying students in Canada quite common. The third piece that I think is perhaps the most critical, the most challenging for higher education institutions to implement was the decision that co-op would operate year round. So students needed to be available from January through to December in one way, shape, or another. This has been one of the most important elements of the ecosystem because employers operate year round. And when we only have things like summer students, or we go to an employer and we say, will you take my student Tuesday to Thursday from 2 to 4 p.m., it's really hard for them to figure out how to make a system around that. But because co-op students are available year round, our employers don't treat them like an interruption to their work. They treat them as part of their talent pipeline. The final piece to put around this is that creating a structure, whether or not it is the perfect structure, also allowed government to support and endorse and create funding programs. I'm going to give you a rapid fire overview of some of the funding mechanisms that we have in place in Canada. And the core point is that all of these funding programs link back to those accreditation criteria. I once had a policymaker say to me, I will fund co-op any day of the week because I know exactly what I'm getting. And that's your challenge. That's your work ahead with the other forms of work integrated learning. Really quickly, just to give you a bit of a state of the union for Canada and work integrated learning right now. Within the last decade, we have seen a substantial increase in interest in work integrated learning from government, from industry, and then subsequently from higher education. In 2016, our government introduced a pilot project called the Student Work Placement Program. It was $76 million put aside to support wage subsidies for students in high demand work placements. And that same year, our business and higher education roundtable came together to prioritize making work integrated learning accessible to students across the country. Uh, CAFKE, that organization that was established back in 1973, expanded its mandate to support all forms of will and started to build out this ecosystem with industry, with other higher education partners, with students to advocate for the expansion of these programs. That student work placement program went from 76 million in 2016 to 623 million in 2019. And the government has subsequently supported a mandate that every Canadian student will have an opportunity for work integrated learning by the time they graduate. Just going to kind of skip ahead for the sake of time. So about a decade later, we've had 2.5 billion invested from the Canadian government. If we want to convert that, let's make it 2 million US. Since 2015. And the most significant change for me, having spent a lot of time doing advocacy to government reps, is that they all know what work integrated learning is and they all believe in it. I sat in the Minister of Finance's office and had the policy advisor tell me, you don't need to convince me that will is a good idea. We know it's just good policy. And so even then when we find ourselves in scarcity budgets and times of fiscal restraint, we are continuing to see investment in work integrated learning because of the outcomes for the learners and the outcomes for industry. Dave, let's skip ahead. I'll give a few examples of the kinds of subsidies. These ones are very co-op focused, but just to give you a sense of sort of like how it works across the system, the biggest one is the Student Work Placement Program. Again, we've had continued funding for a decade now. And it's essentially a federal wage subsidy that covers 50 to 70% of a student's salary if industry brings them in. And it's kind of only for net new, so for additional hires that they make. There's also a My Tax business strategy internship that is about research and innovation. So if you bring a student in for a research or innovation project, you can have half of their wages covered. And then at our provincial or state level, we also commonly have tax credits for industry. So in our province here in Ontario, an employer brings a student in, they get 30% of the salary back in a tax credit. And because they're at different government levels, they're all stackable. And trust me, we have employers who know how to get every dollar and will stack every possible thing that they can. Next slide, please. This is a very, very busy slide, and I will take just a minute to explain to you why there are so many icons staring at you. It is to show you the work integrated learning ecosystem that we have established in the past decade, primarily led through the National Association. So in 2016, when all of this interest started to bubble up about work integrated learning, we decided that we really needed to get together and to understand the interests of all of the different stakeholders in the ecosystem so that we could have a common voice for advocacy. So the National Association routinely brings together the federal associations for universities, colleges, polytechnics. CASA is the Federal Student Association, so the association that represents all of the individual university associations. We meet with the Business Higher Education Roundtable. We have become very good partners with our industry associations who give the wage subsidies through the Student Work Placement Program. And we regularly get together and work on policy documents, on submissions to the different government bodies that would eventually be establishing the federal budget. So we have worked very, very intentionally, having national conversations on work integrated learning, roundtables with these different organizations so that we know each other, we trust each other, and we're advocating collectively. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to move into some of the critical success factors. These are ones that I would say have held true over different contexts, cultures, economies, labor markets, education systems, you name it. So I've built will in countries from Senegal through to the UAE, and I can assure you that it works everywhere, but it doesn't work anywhere unless you start with your employer partners and you actually treat them as partners. So you actually understand what their needs are, their skill gaps are. You think differently about educational programming so that it meets their needs. I always recommend that you don't start to try and boil the ocean with a system-wide solution, but find those labor markets that are desperately looking for talent and have those industries that are desperately looking for talent and have those conversations with them about how your students might have the skills that they are looking for and what they would need from you in order to make that happen. The second piece, institutional support. Work integrated learning is not business as usual for higher ed. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we see is that institutions treat it as such. And this still happens even when we go in and say, make sure you're putting aside dedicated resources. Sometimes institutions try and do this by just adding more to the faculty. You will be able to do some work integrated learning, but you won't be able to achieve scale unless you think about resources. You think about buy-in from faculty. You have dedicated staffing. University of Waterloo, we have 250 people that support that co-op program. So that's the scale that we need to be working at. And of course, that means we need a model where we can fund it and resource it and have it grow. You need students who are prepared to contribute. They are partners in this. And so that means you need to make sure there's space in the curriculum to prepare the students for those will experiences, working closely with your partners to make sure that the experiences that you're giving to the students make sense for them and that the students have the skills that they need to successfully complete those experiences. Probably isn't a shock to you based on my earlier history lesson that I think standards are critical. And I think they're actually more important for the interoperability than for the standard itself. I don't know if 4 months is the right time for a work term, but I know that creating a system has helped us grow will and co-op in Canada in a way that we wouldn't be able to without that structure. And then last but certainly not least, In all of the contexts that I've worked in, it's very difficult to build work integrated learning if you don't have government as a partner, if they don't recognize the extra costs that it brings to institutions, uh, if they aren't thinking about ways that they could give incentives or tax credits, and if there isn't money for that, they can at least be providing certain policy levers. So sometimes it's things like requirement and procurement contracts that students are brought in if they're getting a state contract or something like that. Okay, I'm almost at time, so I'm going to do rapid fire opportunities for Louisiana. Dave, let's go to the next slide. Dave started with a quote from our friends Sovila and Vardy. They wrote about the history of co-op in the States. I highly recommend that you read their work and learn about what has been successful and where some of the challenges are. I see such a beautiful opportunity for you ahead. I'm so excited that you are thinking about this at the state level because doing so helps to facilitate all of these individual institutions that might be struggling to do it on their own. So, my top 5 thoughts on your roadmap for success: start with your local context. Those priority sectors, the regional workforce gaps, as I said, to have those conversations, see where the need is, build out those pilot projects, create that proof of concept. Think about how you create a shared vision. I was just noting at your interim report that you've got, your work-based learning playbook. How can you use that to create a shared vision, to create that community of practice for your administrators, for your staff? It's often lonely work. And so to bring the group together and help to build that vision will actually go a long way towards helping you achieve your goals. The next two, it's kind of a dice toss as to which one should be first: policy, funding, and incentives. Having conversations with government, what is possible? Are there resources that can be brought to bear to build out these programs, whether that's for industry, whether it is for the higher education institutions themselves? How do we move from pilot to scale? Institutional capacity, core element that is often overlooked, that again, I think is the most important element in getting to scale. It is professional work and it needs to be treated as such. So finding that funding model that grows as your enrollment goes, building that institutional capacity, building the expertise. And then I think you're already thinking about some of these things: quality data and your overall ecosystem. So, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and how are you measuring them? And how are you going to take the information that you get in your program evaluation and actually evolve your programming from there? I went on way too long. I think I'll pass it back to Dave. Are you going to do the wrap up?
Happy to. Yeah. I mean, I felt like I should have been taking notes. That was an absolute masterclass and really appreciated you walking us through building an ecosystem. We've left just a few minutes. I know that you've got another speaker coming in shortly, so we can pause here. I'll just say thanks to the Board of Regents for having us. We hope that this has been helpful. You can always reach out to us after this presentation, but with whatever time's left, we're happy to address any questions.
Or we facilitated questions from Aaron Bruce. You want to go?
Okay. So one of my questions that I have for you guys from a student perspective, being I'm the only student in the room, if the same, if we do integrate this into our curriculums and everything, does it add any time or length to programs? Hello?
Yes.
And
Hello.
how,
How much? Was that the question?
yeah, does it? And if so, how much time would it add for students to be still in school for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our program is 4 2/3 years. So almost all of our undergraduate degrees in Canada are 4 years. Ours has an additional 2 semesters so that the students are getting that 2 years of work experience. They come to us for that. They know that the deal is that they're getting a full academic program and then 2 years of work experience. I do know that there are many American universities that have a similar model that are looking at kind of cutting down the time from 5 years to four. So Drexel, Cincinnati, those kinds of institutions.
Mine. I know
Okay.
people are shy. Yes.
what are the disciplines that most likely take advantage of this? But obviously engineering, but what else are we looking at? It's not the-
Do you want to go ahead, Dave? Do you want me to jump in?
There's the Waterloo answer, there's the Canadian answer. Waterloo has its foundations in engineering, technology, computer science. So those are the disciplines that are probably a little bit overrepresented in the co-op model at our institution. Across Canada, you can basically see any academic discipline you can think of is connected into some form of work integrated learning in some way. And I think the message here is that not all one size is going to fit every sort of discipline. There's going to be certain disciplines like health and education that are more likely to rely on something like a practicum or an unpaid field placement. Other disciplines, business, technology, engineering, architecture, might be more open to that kind of structured co-op program that Anne's referring to. I think the important thing is to check in with stakeholders to see what model is going to fit their context.
And I guess I just might throw in a very quick plug because we tend to think engineering, IT, business. And when I do work around the world and they say, where should I start? I say, start with engineering, IT, business because they're the easiest ones. But you can absolutely do work integrated learning for history. I did. Does it shock you that I have degrees in history? I did a co-op program at Waterloo in history. So they exist around the world, and it has a lot to do with how you set up your operations as to how you're going to find those opportunities for students.
Are these all bachelor's degrees or do you have different degree levels?
So we have 75% of our students in bachelor degrees do co-op. We are increasingly looking at master's level and even some PhD level programs. And I would say that's a trend across Canada as well. A lot of growth in thinking about how you do a one-year professional master's program with work integrated learning in it.
What about the lower level degrees, shorter than 4 years?
So we don't have them, but Canada's college program has countless examples of 2-year programs where they have co-op embedded. One of the only changes we made to accreditation was to lower that 30% so that co-op programs in colleges could participate, and it's 25% for them. So there's lots and lots of examples of doing it well at the college level.
And what sort, are those the same sort of fields or are there any differences there?
Roughly the same field. Our college programs might be a little more applied. You'd be more likely to find skilled trades in colleges in Canada and diplomas instead of degrees, that sort of thing.
Can you say a little bit more about the employer engagement? So typical size of an employer, kind of the ratio between the size of the employer and the number of co-op students they might have, and just some of the experiences for the campuses and university teams as they are working with employers, what that capacity looks like.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then I'll pass to Dave because we've just done some research on engagement with small businesses. We have the full gamut of employers from the Royal Bank of Canada is one of the largest employers. They hire 1,200 students a term. The head of the bank is also a Waterloo co-op student that worked at the bank and is the biggest supporter of co-op that you could imagine. So there's kind of the crown jewel story through to small businesses that have no employees that actually only operate and grow with student talent. So we have the full spectrum, every single industry that you could imagine. We're doing a research project on the impact of AI on these experiences, and our database is 250,000 job descriptions and 1,200 industries, I think. Dave, is that right? It's
Definitely 250,000 job descriptions since 2017. It's astronomical.
And so really, if you can name it, we've got a co-op student working there. And then your second part of your question was, what does the engagement look like? So we have staff that are employer experience managers, and their role is to develop new business, to support our employers. They're there if there are issues with the student during the work term. They talk to them about their talent strategies. How can they leverage student talent? We have a centralized system. So employers can post a job and any student, almost any student across campus can apply for it. So we're always kind of talking to them. Do you need a marketing student too? What about your front desk? What about your data analytics? All of those things to kind of bring in more students. Dave, I don't know if you want to add anything particular from the SME stuff that we did.
Yeah, great prompt. We're just wrapping up a research project right now that explores the impact of co-op participation on specifically small and medium enterprises. And there's a few things that stand out. I guess the big takeaway is something like 8 out of 10 people, representatives that we surveyed, said that their participation in co-op had a lasting impact on how they do human resources management. So it didn't just involve learning how to supervise a co-op student. Participation in co-op, taking on a co-op student fundamentally changed how they manage people at a strategic level. As an example, some of the reports suggest things like they, for the very first time, had to formalize their onboarding process because they'd never done that before. You bring in an 18 or a 19-year-old who starts to ask questions and says, my institution wants us to look a certain way. That organization is now prompted to write these things down and think through it for the very first time. It goes beyond onboarding to things like strategy and talent pipeline development. But what we're really seeing is that co-op is not just for multi-international, the biggest organizations you can think of. Even the very smallest organization of 10 people can benefit from participation in this kind of model.
I was just Googling your university because we're doing some work around untapped talent, justice impacted individuals. And I was curious and surprised, pleasingly surprised to see that you all have will programs for carceral facilities. How does that work? Because it asks on here and then, the people may be hallucinating and they may not be saying the right stuff. So I just want to get your input on whether or not you all are doing any of your work integrated learning for individuals that are behind the wall and those who have been recently released with a record.
Right. We do not. However, I have done work with institutions in South Africa that are dealing with this exact challenge where they have scale of 350,000 learners across the country that they are trying to support, some of whom are incarcerated. And how do you give students real world examples and work and experience when they are behind bars? They have lots and lots of challenges that we can't imagine in terms of budgeting and funding and all of those things, but they do exist. They support those learners. It is usually project-based work integrated learning. So Dave mentioned it at the beginning, the chirps where industry will come in and give a brief and the student would be able to access that online. They'd be working with real data, authentic outcomes, all of the key elements of work integrated learning, but they're able to do so while they are incarcerated.
So how do you do the pay?
Sorry, I missed the second half of that.
I was just thinking through the pay piece, but since you all do it specifically, I'll Google it. I'll check it out.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, in South Africa, these work integrated learning experiences often aren't paid. They have funding for students for transportation and meals and sometimes accommodation and things like that. But in that instance, it's a really great question. It usually just wouldn't be paid.
Do you have students pursuing academic areas that don't align with their co-op positions? And what are you seeing from those? Does that open the door for like liberal arts types of graduates? Or are you seeing maybe some major changes when that happens?
Yes, and yes. So recall that they get 4 to 6 work terms. The professional programs, engineering, pharmacy, architecture, they need to take work terms related to their discipline, but every other student can apply for just about any job And we see all sorts of outcomes from that. We see sometimes students shift programs, but actually more often than not, what we find is that they learn that the skills they have are highly transferable. That is what you hear. I know I can fit in anywhere. I know I have valuable skills. And that's, a quote from a student studying peace and conflict studies. So they see the transferability, and there was a study that was done by one of our colleagues. Co-op students change their disciplines less than non-co-op students. Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I was thinking that same study. It's a bit dated now. It's kind of before the age of Gen AI, and there's more tools for career exploration. But I think that is a bit of a testament that co-op students learn fundamentally how to take charge of their own journeys, and they kind of make the path for themselves. Regardless the name of their academic department, they are in charge of creating their own career, which is the narrative that I put a lot of faith in. I really love that story.
Well, thank you both so much.
Can I have one more?
Yes.
I appreciate it. Going off for Dr. Dawson's question, in order to align it with curriculum, would you have to cut down on anything? So would you, in order to fully integrate work-based learning into curriculums, would anything have to be cut down in those other degree programs?
That's a really great question. So the way that we do it is that there are, in almost every program, there's a co-op option and a non-co-op option. The base degree program is the same. The co-op is above and beyond. They do their work terms, they do some professional development courses. So they get like a bonus on their degree. They get the same degree. One says co-op option. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
And when you did your comparison, you're finding that the ones who took the co-op option have better long-term outcomes than the ones who don't?
Yes, absolutely. From resilience to salary.
Thank you.
All right, then we really do have to wrap you up. I'm sorry we're at time. That was wonderfully informative. We are very grateful to you for spending some time with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We wish
Bye.
you the best of luck, and we are here if you have any questions. So
May
Good
very well be great to have to you. Thanks again. We are now
thank you.
We are now transitioning into a discussion on the ideas and themes raised during the presentation and talk about how they might inform our work here in Louisiana. And to help guide the conversation, we have Kevin Grubb, the Vice President for Work-Based Learning at Strata that we are all very familiar with. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you to facilitate.
Thank you so much. I want to first apologize for a small scratch in my throat. I promise I'm fine and I feel way better than I sound, but if I cut out for a minute, I will get back to that syllable that you might have missed. So much shared in that presentation, and so I just thought maybe we'd have a little bit of time to discuss one particular part of what the folks at the University of Waterloo talked about. And a lot of that aligns with much of the way Strata thinks about work-based learning. So these are things that we also wrestle with too. So in particular, what I thought might be helpful to spend a few minutes talking about is the concept that they mentioned around standards and definitions. That seemed to be a pretty key linchpin to things being able to take off, to policymakers being being able to know what to fund. For employers, that interoperability thing that was mentioned, that seemed pretty critical. So there are many things we could talk about from that presentation, but I thought definitions and standards could be one to allow you all some time to just noodle on together. We do not have a ton of time. So what I thought maybe I'd do is I have some questions up here on a slide for everyone. That we take maybe 15 minutes for you to just huddle up in pairs or trios just around you wherever you are. And take a minute to look at any one of these questions you might want to talk about as a group. I'll let you decide what feels, most important or salient to you to take time to talk about, and then we'll take the last 5 minutes of time that we have here, and I'll just have 3 folks share some thoughts of what emerged from your conversation among your pair or trio, so we can start to hear what was discussed. What I'll ask you also to do, if you don't mind, is if there's anything that feels really important to highlight, there are some pads of paper or pencils around here. Please write those things down. Because we will wanna collect that just to capture the great genius that's here as we start talking about this concept of definitions and standards. Does that make sense to everybody before I let you loose on conversation? Okay, hearing nothing about that, I will let you huddle up in groups of 2 or 3, wherever you are. Feel free to write down great things here, and I will then ask, I'll call time about 15 minutes for just a pull up on some things that were discussed. Thank you all, have that. Oh, I'm so sorry, there are some slides in the appendix, because I referenced Colorado on here, I should have mentioned that, I apologize. That I threw in, Colorado has a definition of work-based learning, and Jobs for the Future also has a definition of work-based learning. They have a framework for work-based learning. So feel free to reference those if you'd like to take a look at them. I thought that this might give you something, yeah, we're gonna generate conversation. Continue.
The Canadian, accreditation stuff, really don't know this stuff.
Very flat.
Those things are very foreign. Yeah, do. It's just. See, we have a opportunity for students. Yeah. This is what we mean by work-based learning and then it's like.
That's all we create. I think it's.
Yeah, I think we have a sort of opportunity.
Yeah.
Because agree, but I think that's the thing to say too, we don't just download and you can copy anybody else. They look at good helps.
Contract based on things like that. So actually that's probably right, but it was like, start with a certain time and so I think it's to do that better. Now, I put our hands and things like that. I think I'm in a time. I think we need to have a party and partner and your right, like I like that.
Yeah.
Unless.
We have to do it in such a way. Make better use of the improve the utility is what happens. So what I really, this is the reason why I'm trying to.
It can also as basic indicators.
There's a people who research that find the schools that actually need. And a whole lot of.
Yeah.
So what I think is to do is.
Personal response.
I think, you know, going through the need of town.
That's a big person.
So like.
Yes.
We don't need
So it's actually. Yeah.
But it's definitely
You're getting something.
there's a little bit, there's a little bit of cost of this, because it's value and value and experience.
Yes, but that's. It's. Yeah. It's not. Flip side of the employers, and then.
Oh, really?
With that last question. Because I think there's.
Yeah, I would think that.
That would, I'm afraid that it's kind of
You know, probably should be. So it's.
Yeah, I do think we want to.
Some examples. I think it should be common.
Great, certainly, that's all of the staff. What it is.
Yes.
Trying to solidify that. Safely. There's lots of ways people play now.
Yeah.
That's.
Yes.
And we think it's really valuable.
Exactly, yes. Yes. That's.
About 5 minutes left. If you want to switch questions, now might be a good time if you haven't. 5 minutes.
I agree.
Yeah, but I guess that.
Yeah. 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 I certainly. Coming in. Let's test what works. And it's not. Yes, my question is, I know there's. How good is all those to find those, you know, what's the now I should see that. Yes.
I mean, the reality is. Really. I can find a way to tell people where.
But I do agree that you're, yeah, yeah. So I'm going now. I do think, yeah, like, man, I can scratch that. The work things. No, not at all. Yeah.
I like it, great.
That's the wrong or if you.
But I also don't have this.
So if you go there, yeah, and the next few minutes, right? They're gonna be that. They're probably not. This one's where you're gonna be able to hit my part of it's going.
Other side of it, you were saying, like, I hear the picture, particularly, right, the speaker couch, that's the sentence, so very. So then it's places, yeah. I look at her work, yes.
So.
This is the other side of this thing. Sometimes,
Yeah.
metrics.
How long was it?
Yeah.
So.
More than that, they have. Right. So there is. So
It's right. It's like they're using us. It's friendly.
There's some
All right, if I could ask you all to return to your seats. I will bring it back to one conversation here. As a capital E extrovert, I hate interrupting conversation, but I'm gonna have to do it for the purpose of time. So if I could bring us back to one conversation, that'd be great. Thank you all so much. I saw a lot of writing, I heard a lot of chuckles, I saw a lot of serious faces. So that tells me there was some good conversation that happened among you all. And I just wanna, again, for the purpose of time, maybe just limit us to if the three groups or people could give us some comments about what you discussed. That use these questions as just a prompt for discussion. You can talk about many other things related to definitions. I'd love to just hear some of that among you all. And again, we'll take all your notes if you want to write those. Melinda's graciously offered to collect them at the end of the meeting. We'll have another time to discuss after the next presentation too, so more time. But three people, if I could just hear from three folks about.
Can our group go first?
Oh, wow, yes, that'd be wonderful.
I don't want them to take the stuff from front of that.
Wonderful.
All right, so we started with the first question first. What should the definition include? It should include things learned from the classroom and how they were applied. The development of soft skills for all professions. What are the skills that translate not just to one profession, but to all professions? It should definitely have a co-curricular component within all of these, as well as, understanding that they go from light touch to an immersion experience. At the end, there should be some sort of a capstone report or an application at the end of term. It's not just, okay, today's your last day, let's have cake and move on. And then the student should then share back to the class, how do you apply this knowledge? What was learned and how can it be applied? And also share with others, this information to, one, cement that knowledge within the student themselves, but two, how did you apply it? And why should others go after those opportunities in the future? All of those things are critical. The second question, we share definitions, basically creates a singular shared vocabulary. There needs to be a shared vocabulary by business, by industry, and by academics and governments, where we're all talking from the same thing and not 35 institutions speaking in a different language. And then last, who should create this shared vocabulary? Well, we're looking at the top of each group. So the border regions, obviously the tops for education. Lobby, Louisiana Business and Industry would be, top for business and industry. But then the component of what about governmental? Should we bring in the feds? Does it slow it down? Things like that. But at the very least, we need to have a shared vocabulary as well.
And we said Louisiana works for that government piece because they pulled on the feds. The word that we used in that second one was calibrate, which means how do we close the communication gaps? So when people in Louisiana, regardless of where you are, hear work-based learning, they know what it is. And it's similar to what we have had to do with what is our educational attainment goal for Louisiana. It doesn't matter who you walk up to and ask that question to, they're gonna say it's 60 by 30. And it's not the region's goal, it's the state of Louisiana's educational attainment goal. And we want to make sure that it communicates and translates like that.
So shared ownership.
Shared
Yeah,
ownership.
something that's very clear. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Another group. Yes, you have to share all your answers. I love that I heard all the answers, but whatever you feel like you want to share, Steve.
So I'm just gonna share kind of our answer to the first question and the last question. I think what you said around the second question is universal. The thing that we talked about is we really like the way that Colorado has a continuum, and we kind of like the word use continuum instead of definition, because definition says finite and continuum is definitely a swim. And so the other thing that really made an impression on us was education coordinated learner initiated and employer, and business led, there we go. That made a huge impression on us. The thing that I would like, and I'm sure this deeper beyond this framework, is the role of the other if they're not leading. So if education is leading, what role do employers and students play in that section? Vice versa for the other two sections as well. Anything like that?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Katie for figuring out how to read this thing on the back with a.
Very small. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
when you took a picture of it, we zoomed in, so that was just like MacGyver-esque skip. And the other part, and this was just more they're spinning off, it doesn't really answer any of the main questions, but that it would be really neat to know more about co-ops here in Louisiana, because I know they exist, but they're like some sort of. Like it's a weird stepchild you put up in the attic, and you know, I've never interacted with co-ops. That are students that went through that program, not while I was at LSU, not while I taught at LSU, not any of that,
Yeah, we have cost sales.
Yeah, I know you do.
Yeah.
But I don't know where you hide them at, because I just, yeah, so I just, so it would be see. Just how some of that actually interacts, so we would know, so we get to the policy realm, like, what you do with tops, like when they take off. Hey, I'm sure there's some rule somewhere that allows me to make it work, but I don't know, it's just.
Some more visibility into specific models.
Yeah, well, specifically, maybe having some of those people actually come and present here.
Wonderful. In the interest of time, I'm gonna close this down, because I want to keep us to task. It's 2:26, so I'm already 1 minute
Can I
over.
just add one thing? One thing that Adam brought up is the need to include our K-12 partners when we make these definitions, so we can be aligned to the whole.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you all very much, and I will pass it forward.
Thank you, Kevin. Recently, Leaders for a Better Louisiana distributed a survey to employers to better understand their perceptions of and experiences with work-based learning, and to provide a high-level overview of the preliminary findings and key themes emerging from the responses. I will now turn it over to Tristan.
Thank you. These are very preliminary results. We look forward to more employers sharing their thoughts with us throughout the summer, but certainly these are the first 26, and they already paint, I think, a pretty important picture. So I'm just going to go through the numbers quickly.
Yep.
And then we'll see what we got. So first of all, you can see that we, just as we heard from Ann and Dave, we heard from people from businesses of all sizes. So 1 to 9, 10 to 50, 51 to 250, and 251 on the bottom. So pretty even spread across different organizations. And then we asked, how do you currently think of yourself as a business when it comes to perhaps the health of your business? This should make you feel happy inside, and Pedro as well. Then,
Yes.
Then half of them say they're stable, and half of them say they're growing, and none of them say they're shrinking. So that's very good, right? So we did allow them to select more than thing. I don't think anybody selected both stable and unstable, so it's good. But we also asked them, so do you need additional resources to recruit entry-level workers and senior-level workers? And again, you can see a healthy proportion of them do. So that's I think an encouraging slide to see. All right, so now on to work-based learning. We say, do you offer work-based learning in some form or fashion? So paid, unpaid, co-op, internship, project-based, preceptorship, clinical placement, all of the different kinds of things. We asked it in, you'll see in just a second, we asked it in a collegiate setting, we asked it in a K-12 setting. This is in the collegiate setting right now, and you can see that about 70% say that they do offer some form of work-based learning, about 30% say they don't. And then we said, what kind of things do you offer? And so you can see this, that again, the most popular thing to offer is a paid internship. Right now, about 70% of those people who, 70% of the 70% are saying they offer a paid internship, about 30% unpaid, but they offer all kinds of other things too. So co-ops, apprenticeships, service learning, all kinds of things. Again, about 30% said they don't do anything.
do we think that maybe the responses were biased towards people who were offering something?
I don't know, so you'll see in just a second when we get to K-12. That we get a very different picture, but it's the same people who are answering, so.
It just seems like that's.
There's
really
part of me that
common,
thought,
but-
okay, look, it's just all the people who are already doing it, who are telling us what they're doing.
Well, that's totally what I'm asking, yes.
But it seems as though there's something more. We did ask them, again, this is the 30% of people who said they don't do it right now. We said, so how come you don't do it right now?
They don't know how to.
They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to get started. And some of them say we don't have the budget, some of them say they're focusing on other things, but overwhelmingly they say we're not doing it right now. Because either we don't have the capacity or we don't know how to get started. So that's a pretty, if that trend continues, which we suspect it probably will, then I think tells us immediately something that we should be getting ourselves to do. And of course, it's one of the deliverables that we're already working on, so more to come, but at least validated. And then perceptions about how it is that they think of these people after their experience with your organization. Do you think that the experience that they had with you improved them? We think, yeah, overwhelmingly they say they either strongly agree or agree. But about 30% say neither of the above, but overwhelmingly they think that they do in fact get. All right, so now on to K-12. So you remember this one? So 70% said they offered to collegiate students, 30% said they don't. Same people, 80% said they do not offer currently any kind of a work-based experience to students in K-12. So it's complete mirror image. Again, some of it is because they don't know how to get it started. But not insignificant proportions say they don't see any value in it. And a not insignificant proportion say that they have concerns about liability, risk, or letting school age in terms of apprentices onto their works. I don't know that we were surprised to see that big, but
At all in Michigan.
we did ask that question, and we can put together a word cloud and we'll send it out. Oh, it would. Yeah, like I say, literally, this is hot off the press like this morning. So all kind of questions I want to know is, are there connections between some of these answers, are there in between the industries, all of the things, so.
And the geography, yeah.
We do know the geography, and it was all over the state.
Okay.
So that was actually very encouraging. Yeah. All right, and then I think basically last, are you aware that Louisiana offers a tax credit? And largely they are not. On the tax credit.
What's that?
Yeah. So again, I think a good opportunity for us to, they are now, because we just told them, so there's 26 more.
He's 26 already.
People, I know. All right, so handing back to Kevin, who's gonna, let's talk about that.
Well, I actually want to mention real quick, Strata just completed a survey nationally of employers about a range of topics. We published some of that data that was particularly around the impacts of AI on entry level hiring. We're not going to talk about it at length, but I highly recommend you read it. Within that survey, we also asked employers about their offerings of work-based learning, and actually 80% of employers said they offer some form of work-based learning from our sample. So your 70% is actually not that far off from what we found in a recent survey nationally of organizations, and a range types of work-based learning they can do. We broaden that spectrum. So not dissimilar from us. And I would say in my first read of the results recently of this survey, a lot of what you're finding here so far does seem to mimic what the national trends are that we're seeing in employers and offering work-based learning. So while it is very early and hopefully we'll have many more people respond, this looks to be on par with other data that we're seeing.
Did you all have Louisiana employer?
We didn't. It's possible. And I don't know the full breakdown by state of responses. It is a much smaller survey than our state opportunity index. You're all familiar with that tool that has many tens of thousands of students responding. This is a much smaller sample than that. So really, I would say it's probably just representative of national employers, not a specific state.
Has anybody, I apologize for this, and maybe I'm just super cynical, but I absolutely cannot believe that 70% of employers are offering some sort of internship. Like, there's gotta be some.
I think that's probably true.
I think I'm agreeing with you. I don't think so either.
Yeah, I think 26 is. 26 is fun.
Yeah.
Which is to
Well,
say, I would
that
also,
number to begin with.
yeah, I would say like, this is awesome that y'all are able to turn around some data, but just to highlight this.
Mhm.
I would push the ask out to collectively everybody in this room. You all have employers in your networks. The link is available to share. Please do distribute.
Yes.
We have
Yeah.
sent it out to the economic developers and the chambers, and I think Lobby is gonna share it. So more should be coming in, but redistributing it out to a broad base of audiences is a huge opportunity. Tedra, y'all have a huge list of employers too. I don't know if y'all could do it, but it'd be great.
We have
Y'all have
every employer.
Y'all have included in their tax, their
We
filing.
send out a periodic thing. I mean, there probably isn't any reason we couldn't send something. You should look at that. Yeah.
Add the questions to their you want more.
Yeah, yeah, that would go over.
In September, we are gonna have a presentation from Handshake, will kind of give us the data from the other side as well, so more to come on that.
That's very-
And at least the initial data that we have from them suggests that, yeah, 70% of employers are non-Louisiana offering
Yeah.
workplace learning experience.
Did you have a question on the survey that if they were interested in learning more, that they could check the box, somebody would reach out to them?
So we're gonna reach out to them no matter whether they.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you all for that, that was great. So I have a few more discussion questions for you all based on, again, and then my initial read of the survey. So, if we could just hit the next slide, that'd be great. Essentially what was interesting in that is there are, as Tristan highlighted, I feel highlighted and many of you nodded your heads at. There were some interesting responses in there from employers that suggest that they don't know how to get started. That capacity is a concern for them. So there's things that can be done to ameliorate those issues for sure, to support employers. So I have a couple questions related to that I'd love to hear you all talk about together again, and then we'll come back as a larger group. I'm gonna not forget that I did put stuff in the appendix again, and is still a little small, I apologize. But things that you could reference or think about later, or we can talk about today. Strata, the work-based learning team actually put out a resource on employer intermediaries and how they are effective in their service to employers to help stand up work-based learning. So that may be a way, a resource to be thinking about as you consider who and how to coordinate all the possible players that could support employers in standing up work-based learning, because there are likely many that could. And then there's another sort of capture a screenshot there of an initiative going on in Virginia right now. It was recently launched by the state called Internships VA. It is very specific to internships, of course, as the name would suggest. But as a state, they are standing up a lot of resources on how employers can offer internships. There's some financial incentives in the mix. They have a toolkit for employers that actually some of our team is trying to help develop. That has internship job descriptions, things to consider about how to recruit students for internships. So lots of practical tools for employers to think about how to stand up specifically internships. So there are lots of ways to think about how to do this, and it might be a good idea to have this whole group of wonderful folks think about what would be the way that we actually start to organize ourselves around supporting employers. So we have a lot more time this time. So what I'll maybe say is for the next 15 minutes, you want to pick any one of these questions or something else if your group is like, oh, we have a whole other topic we want to talk about, that's fine with me. To discuss and think about, take notes on. I'll let you know when that 15 minutes is up, and I'll just give you the high sign to say, if you want to talk about another question on this list, this might be a time, and then we'll come back again and just take some of the feedback from folks as you've all discussed. So we can start to hear what reactions we have to supporting employers in standing up work-based learning. That sound good? Great. So feel free to huddle with new groups or the same group you had if you were happy with that. I'll give you the permission to move around the room if you want, and I'll be calling time just as we're moving through discussion. Do you have a question? Yes?
When you say staff capacity,
Yes.
what's that?
What is, so
What's that? business staff?
Yes.
Oh.
So that's in response to the survey question about saying basically we don't have capacity to offer work-based learning. They're saying their current staff don't have the capacity to do it, which I don't know exactly what that means, but from.
Question is that.
Yeah. Well, I would interject and say that I think maybe what they might be considering there, these are consistent with national data and surveys that Strata is aware of or has done. Things like we don't have the time for a manager to manage an intern, right? Or a co-op or finance, right?
Of course.
We don't have the time to create or scope the proper projects for what an intern or an apprentice or a co-op could do. So the time to actually think about what is the program, what is the offering, how do we continue managing that person when we bring them on board? So the capacity there is a little bit more about the time capacity, right? The space to be able to actually host that and do that effectively. Does that help a little bit? Yeah. So that's a good question. So think about that.
I think digging in a little deeper would make it easier to understand.
Digging in a little deeper on what now?
Like digging into when you say staff, if you answered that staff.
Oh, yes.
Issue
Yes,
with a follow-up question
yes.
as to choices, right?
What does that mean to you?
Yes, right, rank these 3 options or something like that.
Absolutely. A good note for whatever might come next with this survey. Any other questions before I let you loose? That's a great question. Thank you. All right, feel free to chat together.
And that's gonna be an employer base.
Yeah, it really is.
Right, so. Register.
And I know.
Right, to help.
Yeah, the same.
I guess.
We've done with that, it's great.
But yes, they're all having certain time where that whole like. But I think we. Yeah. Well, so, yeah, I think that's. The non. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I actually agree, because I doesn't retire, that's what I not suspect. But, so now, these are different case on. We don't have any great person, but that have none of that. For parents, right, yes,
Please, again, last, I've been here 5 years. All of the. So I basically. I started pushing on, but everybody maybe comes along, if it doesn't happen, go like that. It's
I know the answer. How did that make the staff? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It does make me. You have an associate. And you're involved with a and you can be. He doesn't get paid for that's very famous. The reality is that you're working in a way to get selected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to not that big. So somebody should get that. Great.
And I think this is,
See, that's a great thing.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right, and I think that is. Yeah, so that's all, like, just that, I guess I so it's kind of people that various fields, let's figure out what that looks like. And so you should have signed there, what's that next time, it's especially plenty of hassles to us. Absolutely, it's fine.
I don't know.
I literally heard Bruins. Yeah, Bruin, it's really last year, right? He was we were gonna do it anyway.
That's exactly. Yeah, let's say, let's be say. Labor stuff. But I was rather
Yeah,
So, right, it's also.
Somebody, they have to do it.
Probably we do less far.
Yeah, I'm not. I think you are. You said that we should have one of them have this, yes.
I'm trying to think.
Most common.
I think there was like common. I think we use one of the various jobs like. Basic. Oh. Like that.
What we're trying to build now is.
It's not like that. Yes.
We've got about 15 minutes, so if you have only talked about one question, you wanna switch, I'm giving you the out switch. To another topic of conversation for about another 15 minutes, and then we'll pull back from conversation altogether. Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, yes, yes. Yes.
Sorry, we can have some picture.
I like that.
And
That was. Right.
as sometimes people.
It's done well. When I first heard the athletic department.
Last one, my son is not this friend, but I do, I mean, I give you guys, and so, you know, takes, and eyes through what place, because I by, so that's, as in the round of 60 minutes, type stand, and the specific. You're.
Let's go back and see that's like joint now.
That's free. Oh, really? I mean, it's, yeah, I think it's not. And what the, so, it's under slide. Yes.
So what do you all say?
Yeah, yeah. Very big concept, yeah, so like. So, but it's what you're able to. That is, yeah.
Yeah, we usually try to encourage programs to get kind of like that.
Yeah.
Because the fact is, especially the third, the English. And fair and staff class. I don't have any songs. Great. And although. Regional, I hear. You're kind of in here. Yeah.
So they got that sense. Just task. Is that.
But they were trying to get. So now, yes, but once
Well, and that's the next. Next phase of creating the collaboration.
Yeah, yeah.
Currently, we don't get it. They don't have a whole money about that.
Right.
About 3 more minutes.
It's like, reality is it's not gonna be any good unless you really want to get it.
Exactly. I don't feel like.
I think once the contract.
Yeah.
It was 12 now.
And the last thing.
That goes in.
Sorry, we default. There's gonna be some infringement. So that's what it is. I get the accuracy.
You have to ask about it.
Big.
Yeah. They basically not for. Yeah.
If I would say, if they come back in subdivision, they are. That's just a very.
I think teachers better should.
That's right. Yeah. Almost. Yeah.
So the real.
Relative.
All right, that's the concern, everybody get back to. Bring it to one conversation, that'd be great. Compared to the very short amount of time I gave you before, I hope that felt a little bit more luxurious. Time to talk. Well, I saw a lot of folks writing things down. Thank you for doing that. Would love to hear a few comments from some of the groups about what came up in this conversation about employers, how to support them. If there are any wonderful ideas about if there were one thing we should be doing next, what should we do? So for anyone who wants to take the floor, here's your hand and I'll let you talk.
So for number 2, service learning was one of the things that Waterloo, I think, had as their option. And you know, what a great opportunity to partner a class with a business and say, you know, come up with, you know, tasks that our internships can do and ready, make instructions. So when we get an internship, we can hand them what our expectations are for them. For example, maybe it's managing their social media or, you know, doing something else for them. But to me, that's an easy way, right, to help, but Kira's pointing out, what are their needs? That can be a partnership that can help them support them. And then students are learning, the company's benefiting.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes.
Being that we had a great discussion with the career service directors, I'll defer to them if they have anything. Always good stuff.
It comes down to making some
I mean, let's call it what it is. There are some employers that they don't know where to start, they don't know what to do, and so it's just something to add on to the plate. You know, depending on the size of the company, depending on how many hats each person's wearing, it's just not realistic. If we have a document, if we have a plan, you know, an electronic document, that we can provide that's plug and play, that makes it easy. If you make it easy, that's the technical tool.
I'm curious, like, is that something that you're seeing happen at institutions, or you wish you could do more of at institutions?
I wish I could do more of as an institution, but very similar to the employers that we work with, we too wear a lot of hats. We too get pulled in 32 different directions on a daily basis. And so it's just not realistic. I'd love to be able to. I think, again, going back to a shared language, you know, the easier we make it for Louisiana businesses to support Louisiana students, the more they'll do. I think we have great businesses in the state. I've been a part of a lot of those businesses outside of education. It's just, what is the ROI to the business? What is their return on investment to make this investment into students? There are some employers that say, and Entergy is one of them, I love internship programs because we get to test drive students, students get to test drive us, and we're looking to hire them at the end. If we don't offer them the job, that should tell them how they do. I can't quote that person, but that's what I feel. But again, it's then taking it to the faculty and you know, while in the College of Business, which I hear talked about a lot, yeah, of course it's easy for the College of Business to do this. This is where this stuff lives and breathes. Let's go talk about the Department of Arts. Let's talk about the College of the Humanities and Social Sciences. Let's talk about things that they are around and how they connect different opportunities to them. Let's talk to employers about what value they see in an English major or psychology major, things like that, and how those folks would fit well in businesses. And again, there are a lot of businesses that believe gravitate towards that and that do gravitate towards that. But again, it's just got to be clear. It's got to be concise, plug and play, make it easy, and people on both sides of the aisle.
Great. One thing that you mentioned, I want to just draw out a little bit more too, is the idea that this work-based learning solves a problem for the employer. And that's something that in a lot of Strong's research on this has come out over and over and over again, that the type of work-based learning experience that an employer offers and how they are supported in offering that is best when it's all rooted in the problem they have. So an apprenticeship is a very different thing than an internship, right? For example, this is where definitions are very helpful. So when we say work-based learning, those things are very, very different things to an employer, to a student. So it matters a lot how the type of work-based learning that is being suggested or is being set up solves a problem. So what you mentioned there is about they want to hire someone full-time, maybe this is a test drive. That's a very important reason to think about internship programs. So much to be explored there about like, what is the business problem this solves? And that maybe is a way to, and our Waterloo folks actually talk about that too, starting with the employers. It's like, that's, what is it for them that they need? That can be a helpful way to start, work-based learning. Is your hand up too?
Yeah, I would argue, and this was Adam Knapp's, you know, astute, same one for a long time, that interns solve our like talent retention problem in the state. So anecdotally, we see that if students intern at a Louisiana company, they're more likely to stay. And I'll just use accounting, for example. Local accounting employers in Baton Rouge have gotten very smart. They hire interns as freshmen after their freshman or sophomore year because the Big Four don't take them until after their junior year. And so if they can land them and they retain them as part-time student workers while they're in school, by the time they're junior, they already see their partner track ahead of them. And they're like, well, I'm good.
So there's benefits to the student, to the state, to the employer, right, in many ways. So it is that, what's the benefit to that employer, right? The benefit to that employer is a pipeline of talent that they can keep.
One thing we talked about, just to kind of bounce off that, is kind of all the way on the other side of providing good assistance to the employer. The employer still has to come to the table with skin in the game. And if they're coming with nothing, it's not gonna be a good experience for anybody.
I think that's kind of what we was talking about, to go back to the whole circle. The employer needs to become critical of how we engage, because if the employer comes to the table with their needs, then the definition of, is it an intern, co-op, or practicum? They come to the table and tell us what their needs are. And it goes back to the database, the dashboard that we're required to build. If we develop an RFP system for employers to put what their needs are, and then as institutions, we can then bid on it, because then we have to ask the critical question: does our curriculum prepare the students to help with solving that need? And here's, I put the example, I'm use ourselves of Bachelor of Science in Chemistry. We're teaching them chemistry, but what if they get into chemical cells? They does our curriculum prepare them for stakeholder engagement? Do they know how to pitch a ton of chemicals? But that's something we would have to then say, hey, from a co-curricular standpoint, we need to develop that talent pool of stakeholder engagement to prepare that Bachelor of Science of Chemistry to sell a product, because that's not in our curriculum. Should we marry that with business? But if we don't know the needs of a chemical company for bachelors that specifically say we need this because we have, and I think you pointed out, if they're coming up to retirement, we have 30 people in the pipeline that can retire in the next 5 to 7 years. Where do we as an institution know that and to do their needs? So it's kind of like course sourcing, need sourcing, some stuff we did previously from an international standpoint. What are your needs? Can we provide technical expertise with the talent pool for that alignment? But for us as an industry, where is that in our curriculum? How do we shore that up within our curriculum? Right? Are we do, and this is where the course area come in at, or the thing, can we quickly put these micro credentials in place for customer satisfaction, customer engagement? Because I need to understand nomenclature and SM1 reaction, and now we got to do customer engagement. Yeah. But all of those things, where do we put all of this to look at it from a holistic standpoint, to bid on it, to implement it, to then come back a year from now and evaluate it? What is the return on investment? All of this stuff is never connected. Yeah.
Dr. Ross, really. Oh, no, analysts, I think you don't.
Well, I was gonna ask, I think you mentioned a moment ago in intermediaries and models of intermediaries, Dr. Wicker, I think. In this last legislative session, there was a very big debate between Louisiana Works, LCTC, Board of Regents, Department of Ed about who's responsible for the curriculum alignment to industry, the business industry, the core question you're asking. And I think it's a great question nationally. There's a lot of states trying to figure that same question out. We've been, wondering the same ourselves, and looking at how in other states there are industry intermediary partners that help think about it for, say, the chemical industry, or more broadly, kind of manufacturing pathways, or allied health or nursing, or kind of health pathways. And so what they've done in some states to organize that those groups are coordinated to help feed K-12 all the way to, college and university pathways, as well as adult re-education kind of curriculum pathways. So I'd be curious to know whether that's something this task force has some input in. It's already starting to come about because K-12 has put it into the accountability formula that there's some expectation that there's credit you get if you have certain things that are taught. And then who sets that, who approves what's the right pathway for each industry is a kind of big question, one that you might want to add.
Well, and yeah, I mean, it is sort of a tangled web, and the different, there are different pathways within the same industry, and obviously, most industries hire across a massive swath of occupations. But I will say, with the workforce system reform that we're doing, there is a need to develop something that works better than a workforce development board to get local employer needs up to the state level and into our state plan. And I think there's two things. One, there's the regional needs and the differences between different regions of the state. But then there are consistencies for industry sectors, and then, major consistencies like the need for skilled trades, which is crossing almost all of our industries. So this is something that we'll be tangling with, and we're gonna need the help of everybody. This thing will figure that out.
Yeah, we just down the right.
Yeah, yeah,
creating that kind of general
Yes.
alignment.
yes, that was very helpful.
2 more minutes.
So we had a couple of different ideas and, I just wanna drop a name in your hearing, Will. Work integrated Louisiana, to play what we heard today. Kind of this
I
work
was thinking really
integrated.
half of it, so.
Work integrated Louisiana, but we thought about things. The question number two, like who's best positioned? If we started thinking about all the entities we have in Louisiana, but we probably need, I'm gonna just say a work integrated learning czar that's externally facing to business and industry. That wouldn't be necessarily a region person, but we do need an internally facing policy around what colleges and universities should be producing. And that responsible person and the business responsible person need to be joined at the hip. The question that was asked is, well, who does the person report to if they're not doing the thing right? And so when we start looking at all of the different businesses, the artist formerly known as the C100, we talked about that. And then we talked about cable. So if you think about cable and the C100, when they merged, the policy, they became known, Leaders for a Better Louisiana, maybe business thinks of them more now as a policy think tank that has business influence, right? I don't know if that's true or not.
Can I record that?
Yeah. And then if Lot B is the person that's responsible for that, what does that mean for entrepreneurs, for smaller businesses, for things? What does it mean for the chemical association and so on and so forth? So what came to mind is the LaSTEM model. With LaSTEM, we needed to get our arms around this whole STEM education. And we created a network that brought anybody who thought they were doing something with STEM at least somewhere into the ecosystem. We had a board that was responsible for evaluating it, creating a definition, convening all the partners, doing an RFP for regional work, and then holding an entity responsible, and then we kick them out of the nest and say, go be great in Louisiana. And so that's how we were thinking that it may not be what we have, it may be something we have to create that is based on what we give it to live on, if that makes sense. So.
And we were talking a little bit about who owns what. I mean, the fact is, we clearly own the piece that is not heavily education involved, like the registered apprenticeships belong with us. And we are building out an employer facing unit with Adam's help, thank you, but that may have some role around work-based learning, but we can't do the whole thing.
Right.
And so I think
do we
that,
create the intermediary that is CareerWise Colorado?
well, and yeah, I think we really just, as a group of people in this room, are gonna have to do a lot of work around this. Because, you know, you mentioned the STEM Council, and we've been talking about giving more sort of, you know, broader roles to the STEM Council, but again, I'm not sure that it, like those regional business facing entities, are kind of being figured out, and exactly how they gel, I think it's gonna be part of this.
I know, I'm sorry, my voice, but I also think like, I always feel like cannot be an agency.
Yeah, I think,
Cannot be
yeah,
a government agency because we're, like the business community does not look to a government agency for all their answers generally. And it might be we were talking about like Youth Force NOLA is, how they are doing a great job there. And maybe somebody like that can work both sides of that across the state, or they might just do the southeast part. with a different name, expensive enough. But somebody like that, that's doing that kind of work, should either be a regional, or it could be the entity, so the business community knows where to, but it's not to an agency. And then
Well,
we're still working across.
If I could just, I just wanna make.
Okay, yeah, we're not gonna get into all of that, but I wouldn't wanna end up in a situation where the business community is supposed to go to 5 different places for 5 different things. Like, there has to be somehow a single point of contact that's pulling people in.
We're at 3:23, so I wanna be on 3:24.
Yes.
And pass the floor back to you for closing the meeting. Thank you all so much for the conversations. I really appreciate it, and I hope these discussion questions got you thinking about each of
Drop
these
a
topics.
bomb and say good luck.
Bye. Did a great job for me. But no, these are very important conversations that we hear a lot of states also wrestling with and thinking about, and there's a lot here you already have. You're already at the table here all together, which is so compelling and a huge opportunity for you all that many states don't have us table. So, kudos, and we are honored to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that excellent discussion. And in fact, I mean, I think I'm just gonna make a plea to this group that everybody think through a lot of those sort of table questions that just came up at the end. I think Hedrick's point that agencies have a certain role and a certain demeanor, and maybe it's not ideal for everything, and that we need other partners, but is it gonna be the same partner in every part of the state? Like, how do we think through this? And maybe we can have further discussion about that in our next meeting. I think that would be extremely beneficial from our standpoint. Ebony, do we have any public comments? Okay, do we have any public comments from the folks following me? Oh, that's not public.
Just, yeah, just like wanted to add, you referenced it earlier, Dr. Dunley, about SCR 33, that was a resolution passed this session, is on the topic of worst work-based learning
Yep.
models. To the question about kind of the integration of this approach, it is meant to be a short-term, brief conversation on the question of where should this live? Because it's a part of Board of Regents, it's a part of Bessie, it's a part of Louisiana Works, a lot of employer interest in it. And so there are examples around the country of it being done differently and housed in different places. But it is a pressing question that does have to, we would hope get resolved, is where should it live? And is there a good answer for that? That's part of what that, most of the agencies that are in the room are kind of named as part of that task force, and a few of the other nonprofits that we talked about here are part of thinking about that question.
But I do want to make sure that it doesn't just get forgotten, so if we can make sure we mention in the minutes or any way we need to make sure that we remember what we're talking about before we see each other in September next time. So I just want to put that out there. Yeah, resolution, no, where it lives.
Excellent. All right, then, any public comments from the folks behind me?
The only thing I would throw in is let's not forget that nonprofits are employers too. We talk a lot about this.
Yep.
Don't forget those folks.
Excellent point. Thank you very much for that. All right. Before we adjourn, I would like to remind everyone that our next meeting will be held on Thursday, September 10th. From 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. in this room. And the December meeting date has been changed and is now Tuesday, December 1st at 10 a.m. And we'll update calendar and invitations in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to the Board of Regents staff with more questions, and really thank all of you for your participation and engagement. And I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. So it's this. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.